This episode is brought to you by Vincero Watches. What's up, Wisecrack? Jared again. With the recent release of J.R.R. Tolkien's final book and the upcoming Middle-earth Amazon series with a production budget of $500 million, it's a great time to be a Tolkien fan. But while the growing body of work set in Middle-earth means everything is always improving for fantasy fans, Tolkien himself was of the opposite opinion. Everything is always getting worse. A self-avowed pessimist, Tolkien went so far as to say that he didn't believe history would be anything more than one long defeat. This idea of defeat and decline is the very quality that infuses his fiction with such a sense of longing and nostalgia. But is progress really a pernicious myth, or was Tolkien hitting that pipeweed a little too hard? Well, let's crack open some dusty tomes and find out in this Wisecrack edition on J.R.R. Tolkien's philosophy of history. But before we get there, just a quick shout out to our sponsor Vincero. They've been massively supportive of us and let us do cool stuff, like get super nerdy about Tolkien. Right now, I'm wearing their Chrono S, and it's helped me stop checking my phone every 10 minutes so I can stay on track making more videos. They've got a New Year's sale happening right now, so if you want to set yourself apart and step up your game, check out the link below and watch until the end of the video. They've got great watches for fair prices, so thanks again to Vincero, and now, back to the show. Here's a quick breakdown for the uninitiated. You're probably aware of Tolkien's most famous works, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, or at least Peter Jackson's phenomenal and then just god-awful adaptations of them respectively. But what you may not know is that Frodo and Bilbo exist in an entire Tolkien literary universe set in Middle-earth. The history of Middle-earth is long and set into distinct ages, with Lord of the Rings occurring at the end of the Third Age and the beginning of the Fourth, but that'll be important in a little bit. These ages are, of course, fictional, but they also sync up with our own very real timelines right around the period between prehistory and history. In other words, Lord of the Rings happens on Earth just a really long time ago, which for reasons I'll get into is quite important. But before we get into why Tolkien thought everything is always getting worse, we have to understand one thing. The dude loved history. In The Lost Road, his abandoned book about time travel from our own era back to the Second Age of Middle-earth, Tolkien, through a clearly autobiographical character, writes that his most permanent mood had been since childhood the desire to see the lie of old and forgotten lands, to behold ancient men walking, to hear their languages as they spoke them, in the days before when tongues of forgotten lineage were heard in the kingdoms long fallen. This deep passion for history shows in just how much it pervades his writing. There are over 600 references to the history of Middle-earth in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien's own brush with world history had an even more obvious influence on Middle-earth. Faithful servant Sam Gamgee was inspired by the servants who helped officers such as Tolkien in the trenches of World War I, and Sam's journey through the blasted and barren lands of Mordor is an unmistakable image of no man's land. Tolkien's interest extended beyond events themselves and into the development of languages, literature, and legends.
I first began seriously to invent languages about when I was 13 or 14. I've never stopped, really.
In fact, the exploration of his artificial languages were Tolkien's main concern. Believe it or not, the entire history of Middle-earth is really just a history of the development of Tolkien's constructed languages. Tolkien himself said, "The invention of languages is the foundation. The stories were made rather to provide a world for the languages rather than the reverse."
What do you suppose that means?
Oh, it's quite simple. If you want a friend, you speak the password and the doors will open.
Tolkien was also fascinated by the historical composition and transmission of the written word, undoubtedly stemming from his work as a specialist in medieval culture. The conceit for Lord of the Rings was that it was his own English translation of a book written by hobbits, the Red Book of WESTMARCH. Incidentally, this fictional book also has a rich history with no less than 5 fictional editions, tracing back through writings made by Samwise, Frodo, and Bilbo. So, Lord of the Rings isn't meant to be read as a perfect representation of historical events, but as stories that have been passed down, altered, and inevitably corrupted.
I wonder if people will ever say, "Let's hear about Frodo and the Ring." And they'll say, "Yes, it's one of my favorite stories."
So it's safe to say that Tolkien was obsessed with history and the process of writing it. But that's what makes it so strange that his thoughts about history were so radically different from most contemporary historians and laymen alike. Many philosophers of history, especially those popular in Tolkien's time, thought the move from past to future represented some kind of progress. Technologically, we've gotten the wheel, the steam engine, and frozen pizza, and morally, most people would agree that we became a more just society after the adoption of the Bill of Rights, and even more so after the end of slavery, and again after the end of segregation. Martin Luther King summed up this thinking when he said,
"The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice."
Tolkien vehemently disagreed. He thought that our technological progress wasn't entirely a good thing and that we weren't progressing morally whatsoever, proclaiming in On Fairy Stories, the way men were living in the 20th century was increasing in barbarity at an alarming rate. While Tolkien acknowledged that technology grew increasingly complex, he mocked the idea that industrialization represented an advancement for society. He witnessed his beloved boyhood home of Theriault despoiled by the encroachment of men and machinery. It's a scene which replays itself during the scouring of the Shire, in which trees are needlessly uprooted to make room for ugly rows of housing, and a pleasant watermill is replaced by one billowing black smoke all over the countryside. In The Lost Road, he conflates the human kingdom of Numenor's industrialization with their cultural decay. Our towers grow ever stronger and climb ever higher, but beauty they leave behind upon the earth. Men are ceasing to give love or care for the making of other things for use or delight. In The Hobbit, Tolkien claims that technological development is a symptom of orcish thought, commenting, "It's not unlikely that goblins invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once, for wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them." Those wheels and engines were rolled out for the first time in the form of tanks upon the Western Front, where Tolkien at the Battle of the Somme witnessed firsthand the goblin work wrought by the explosive power of modern artillery. Despite the horrors of trench and chemical warfare, many of Tolkien's contemporaries at the time regarded the Great War as emblematic not only of technological progress in the form of more innovative means of mass killing, but as a necessary step in human history for social progress too. Tolkien, always the pessimist, disagreed. He believed conflict to be inevitable, and recounted years later that this idea arose as a reaction to the contemporary discussions about a war to end all wars. He didn't believe such rhetoric during the war and disliked it even more after it. That conflict must be perpetual is part of his idea of history as being cyclical. Instead of there being a straight line from a primitive past to a more civilized future, Tolkien envisioned societies throughout the ages all dealing with the same perennial set of circumstances arising from unchanging human nature.
War will make corpses of us all.
Many of the events in Middle-earth are meant to be reminiscent of the past, so we have Frodo Nine-Fingered in possession of Sauron's ring during the Third Age, aka Lord of the Rings, which resembles another amputee hero from the past, Baron One-Handed, who recovers a magic jewel from Sauron's former master in the First Age. But Tolkien is no George Lucas building a second Death Star or J.J. Abrams creating a third, and good God, I hope not a fourth. The repetition of this motif is not the result of a lazy author returning to the same well for lack of an original idea. Rather, Frodo bears likeness to Beren because the world they inhabit, though separated by thousands of years, is once again in similar straits. History is repeating itself because it's cyclical.
The eagles are coming.
Eagles! The eagles are coming!
But the history of Middle-earth is not simply cyclical, it's cyclical but always getting worse. These overarching cycles in the history of Middle-earth were broken up into 4 distinct ages that illustrate history as degradation. These bear conspicuous resemblance to Hesiod and Ovid's myths of the Age of Man, in which they establish the now familiar pattern of Golden, Silver, Bronze, and Iron Ages. In mankind's Golden Age, perfect people lived in an Edenic state of nature, not dissimilar to the elves in Tolkien's First Age, coming to live among the gods in the earthly paradise. Then succeeded the Silver and Bronze Ages, each progressively worse for man and filled with worse men, followed by the current Iron Age, the most evil and unhappy yet. Likewise, across the ages of Middle-earth, there's an overriding entropy, each cycle less mythic and more mundane. There is a grandeur in the past that can be echoed in the later ages, but never fully recaptured.
You are a lesser son of greater science.
Consider Rome, aka the city on 7 hills, which Caesar Augustus bragged he left as a city of marble. Yes, the real Rome. Remember, Tolkien's history happens before our own real history. To drive the point home, we learn that many of the cities that preceded Rome also are adorned with marble and have 7 of something. But the further back in time we go, the more grandeur we see. In the Third Age, it was the 7-leveled city of Minas Tirith in Gondor. In the Second Age, there was the city of Romana, from which Tolkien implies that Rome derives its name. In the First Age, there was the original and oldest, the 7-gated city of Gondolin. But as grand as we know Rome was in its heyday, Tolkien would say it had nothing on Minas Tirith during the reign of King Elisar. And then he would have said, yeah, but this ain't nothing compared to Numenor in its golden age, though he'd probably say it slightly more regally. And King Elros of Numenor would have said to that, y'all should hear my dad talk about Gondolin when Turgon was king before those dragons burned it all down to the ground. Again, more regally. The point being, for Tolkien, older equals better. Having the same pattern repeat time and again throughout the cycles of history but becoming progressively a poorer and poorer copy is his way of illustrating that point.
The blood of Numenor is all but spent, its pride and dignity forgotten.
Tolkien's portrayal of history can be partially attributed to aesthetics. Tolkien wished to imbue his work with a medieval flavor, and the medieval period is primarily viewed as the ruins of a more glorious antiquity. Because in the history of Middle-earth, each age is inferior to the one which preceded it, its whole history is imbibed with the nostalgia for a past that can never be recovered.
Long have I desired to look upon the kings of old, my kin.
But it's also, as we mentioned, a direct challenge to the myth of progress. Instead, he favors looking backward and appreciating past, perennial, and even eternal matters. It's for this reason that the noble knights of Gondor always look westward before eating each meal. We look toward Numenor that was, and beyond to Elvenhome that is, and to that which is beyond Elvenhome and ever will be. His friend C.S. Lewis coined the term chronological snobbery to describe those who had an irrational preference for anything new over anything old. But Tolkien was no mere Debbie Downer. He had an actual philosophy of history that he espoused, one which he and Lewis shared with the medieval minds they spent their careers studying. Middle-earth and the real world are in a constant decline for Tolkien because of the way he understands the fundamental nature of reality. Tolkien and Lewis believed that evil was real, not some idea or social construct, but a real and powerful force. Indeed, the most powerful force in the world. Sometimes Tolkien would portray evil as personalized, as with Sauron, or with Sauron's master from the First Age, Morgoth, who was himself more powerful than all the forces of good in the world combined. But Tolkien also portrayed evil as an impersonal force, something even the most pure and innocent hearts were capable of being bent towards. Gandalf refuses the ring for that very reason, knowing he could and would be corrupted. And it's worth remembering that when he stood at the cracks of doom, Frodo failed. He abandoned his mission, gave into temptation, and took the ring for himself.
The ring is mine.
Tolkien called Earth Morgoth's ring. Just as Sauron poured most of his potency into the One Ring, his master Morgoth poured his spirit throughout the Earth and everything else in existence. So whereas particularized evils like Sauron could be addressed, there is a primordial evil in existence that will remain until the Earth itself is destroyed. It's because of this belief that he stated, "I do not expect history to be anything but a long defeat." This was what Tolkien originally envisioned as the ending for his Book of Lost Tales. And now, in the end of fair times comes very nigh, and behold, all the beauty that was yet on the earth, fragments of unimagined loveliness, now goeth it all up in smoke. The same despondent pessimism is best surmised by Frodo as he lay dying on the cliffside of Mount Doom. It's like things are in the world, hope fails, and end comes. We have only a little time to wait now. We are lost in ruin and downfall, and there is no escape. But of course, Frodo lives, and the ring, the stand-in for the inherent evil of the world, is destroyed. So what gives? Was Tolkien chickening out from taking his view of history and evil to their logical conclusion? Did he feel compelled by the conventions of the genre to have a happy ending? Well, that would certainly make sense. After all, he did write, "I would venture to assert that all complete fairy tales must have the consolation of the happy ending. The eucatastrophic tale is the true form of the fairy tale and its highest function." Of all the many words in the many languages that Tolkien invented, this word, eucatastrophe, is undoubtedly the most important. He defines it in its fairy tale setting, a sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur, it does not deny the existence of discatastrophe, of sorrow and failure. It denies, in the face of much evidence if you will, universal final defeat, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy beyond the walls of the world. So basically everything will continue to go to shit, but there will be a sudden change toward good fortune that works against this dire conclusion. Now, beyond the walls of the world here is telling. Tolkien alludes to another force, as Gandalf hints to Frodo.
There are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil. Bilbo was meant to find the ring, in which case you also were meant to have it. And that is an encouraging thought.
Later, Agent Smith, doing his best Morpheus impression, elaborates, "You have come and are met here in the very nick of time by chance, so it seems. Yet it is not so. Believe rather that it is ordered that we who sit here and none others must now find counsel for the perils of the world." So something is driving history toward a goal. This kind of eucatastrophe isn't limited to fictional stories. Tolkien thought that real history contains a fairy story, or a story of a larger kind which embraces all the essence of fairy stories. As such, Tolkien envisioned the end of history as being likewise eucatastrophic. That though history would be nothing more than the long defeat, it would ultimately have a happy ending as unexpected as the eagles arriving at Mount Doom. Ultimately, this was grounded in what Tolkien called Estelle. More than merely being Aragorn's elvish name, Estelle was one of the two elvish words meaning hope, which also meant trust. All throughout life, Tolkien looked around the world, and between the scouring of his own boyhood Shire, his living through a veritable Mordor in the trenches of the Western Front, and later while writing Lord of the Rings, witnessing the rise of real Dark Lords in Hitler and Stalin, Tolkien had no reason to look up and reasonably expect good. And yet, through it all, he never faltered in Estelle, in trust. Just as Tolkien's writing awakened an appreciation of the past among the chronological snobs that had been so enamored by modernity, so too do his myths stir something in us that certainly hopes for there to be real good in the end. When we read the Silmarillion or the Hobbit, or most especially Lord of the Rings, we're all like Sam, in the black of night in the enemy's own land, struck by the beauty of a white star twinkling above him. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced him that in the end, the shadow was only a small and passing thing, that there was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you haven't noticed already, I'm a recent watch convert. This Vincero watch actually helps my productivity massively because every time I check my phone, I get sucked into my 8,000 other notifications. But even if you don't have a YouTube channel to run, watches are a low-key way to turn heads and up your style game. They've got a pretty distinct look and quality feel. More importantly, they're having a huge New Year's sale. It's on the entire site, and you'll be able to earn up to 25% off your entire order. And hey, don't trust me, just some dude on the internet. Trust their over 13,000 5-star reviews. That's more reviews than all of our podcasts have combined. So check out the link in the description, or just go to vincerowatches.com/wisecrack sale to check out their collection and get up to 25% off. When it comes to not looking like a schmuck, I'm gonna take my chances with a company that's name literally translates to I will win. So go decide for yourself. Check out the link in the description for up to 25% off as part of their New Year's sale. And as always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.